Discussion of future development of City Hall. And that's all I have. So I'll recognize our city manager.
Thank you, Mayor, Board of Commissioners, those in attendance tonight. Mayor, thanks to the council for taking time from your busy schedules to have this workshop. It sort of started off innocent enough with a proposal from Mr. Lineberry some time ago about possibly buying the finance building and doing something different with that piece of property. And then he ended up acquiring the property, which is, of course, the old former American Jewelry property. And then since that time, he began to acquire even more property that's east of here, up East Caldwell Street, backs up to the city property, which is our old planning department on the hill, the public works facility, and of course, also City Hall. So what's basically happened over time is it's morphed from just buying a piece of property to a long-term redevelopment vision of possibly incorporating a city hall, a fire department, and then that would involve, of course, removing the old planning office, removing the public works facility. So you'd have almost 1 square block of properties that includes all of our city properties. So basically, there'd be a city hall somewhere on the property, fire department somewhere on the property, public works would move in with us. And I said, well, it's morphed into such a thing that probably at this particular point would be good to get in front of the commission, get your thoughts, your ideas, your feedback on what they're proposing now as the overall development and what that number would look like for us, because we would have some skin in the game with properties, and then in turn there'd be an offset number that we'd pay for the upgrade. So I hope that's a good synopsis of how we got here and that it's morphed over time. I look at it as a positive simply because of the redevelopment that we've had in our downtown corridor, one being Vintage Station North, which Matt and his team was responsible for, and how they sort of transitioned our area. So, Mr. Matt Gardner, I'll turn it over to you.
Matt Gardner, good evening, I guess. Thanks everybody for their time. I want to thank Commissioners Hefner and Vice Mayor Justice for inviting us up to speak this evening. And as Mr. Martin said, we kind of came to this a little bit obliquely. It's really came from conversations between Mr. Martin and the Lineberries about the property that they've been doing, looking at working next to each other, and it really expanded from there. And then they brought kind of us in to kind of see where things are coming. So here's the assemblage of the city block and the property that Lineberry owns right now. So as Kenny said, this little corner parcel right here is what really started the conversation. City owns it. Lineberry and Kenny have been talking about, maybe possibly purchasing that at the end of the year when the existing tenant goes out. You can see values on the city-owned parcels. They're the ones in blue. They did a statement of values from an appraiser that they both had worked with before to get initial values on what that property looks like. So the blue parcels are, obviously, we're sitting in this building right here, City Hall. This are ones that the city currently owns in addition to the yellow one. And then the green properties are the ones that Mark Lineberry owns and his investors. So looking at that, we started, and that's kind of where they brought us in and said, hey, is there something we can do more than just two projects kind of side by side? And so we got excited, brought some of our design team in that did, same group that did Vintage Station North, and started looking at kind of more of a master plan concept here. And it really comes back to, we've been working with the city for quite some time and working in the city and quite some time on several projects. And it really comes back down to what we've seen Mount Juliet do that a lot of other cities don't, is be very forward thinking when it comes to their infrastructure. As the city has grown, they've gone and they've built the roads and then kind of managed growth through that way. And they've done so without heaping up piles of debt, not issuing tons of bonds. And really that fiscal conservatism, that commitment to the better infrastructure has shown by who's moved to the city. You've got that smart growth, that sustainable livability. It's attracted a very highly educated workforce. You've got, as you guys know, super stable and super strong wage growth, very, very low unemployment. And that durable commitment to constant improvement in the delivery of the public services is what we think we can build upon and really improve going forward. So as Mr. Martin said, this really starts with City Hall. And we are looking at a phased development of that block. the first thing we would do is to build City Hall on that corner property while this building is still here. And so all of the city services currently, other than fire and police, we are anticipating being able to be housed in that building. So instead of all of these buildings that you guys have now, and to my knowledge, all of which have been adapted from a prior use at some level, you would have one new building that everybody can be in, have some space to grow, as the city is growing, as services are growing, as space needs are growing, be able to really have that, again, that forward-thinking infrastructure piece that you guys are so good at. We think that this building could achieve that goal. After the building's built, then everybody can move in there once, so we're not having to have all the staff move twice. And then we end up with a site plan that looks like this. And so if I can get my pointer, so City Hall's here on the corner. So again, we're kind of sitting up here. So we're able to build that building first before anything else happens on the block. And then successively, basically, we would come in and then develop the rest of the site plan. And so, the other thing we would do is build the fire station here on the parking lot on the north end of the building. So we'd be able to do the City Hall, the new fire station, to relocate them and I think increase their size. We talked to the fire chief briefly about kinds of things they would want to see, about general size that we think we can accommodate there. So City Hall and the fire station first, again, so that everybody has a place to move to on the front end. After that construction is complete, everybody's moved in, then we kind of have the balance of the city block. Looking at good afternoon, Vice Mayor. A restaurant parcel here on the front, have a office building with retail on the ground floor here in Building C, kind of where we're sitting now. Mark has talked with a grocery group that's very excited about coming into that space. Have a city-owned parking garage here in H that parks the whole project, and that garage is kind of the linchpin for the project from a financial standpoint. I'll get to more details of that later. And around the garage is retail and office. So from the outside, from the Village Green, from the city square here in the middle, you're seeing retail, you're seeing office, you're not just seeing a parking garage. But functionally, it acts a lot like the parking garage in downtown Franklin, where kind of all of the downtown Franklin, the restaurants, a lot of the time, I was there last weekend, we parked in the parking garage and walked to dinner. And then we've got it anchored on the south end by multifamily on the same density as we did for Vintage Station North. 4 stories, park in the parking garage, same units per acre as we did at Vintage Station North. And there's a lot of those apartments can help us pay for a lot of the other things. The financial piece is obviously a big part of this, and I'm racing through because I want to make sure I've got plenty of time for questions. They did a restricted appraisal on the properties that the city owns. It came in for the 2 North Mount Juliet Road properties. The one we're on now in that corner piece ended up at a blended average of $21 per square foot. And likewise, the East Hill properties came in at a $15 per square foot valuation, a total of just over $2 million worth of land here. The way we ran the very high level pro forma that we did is we assumed that as part of the City Hall building on land that we own now, or that the library owns now, that becomes basically we build it, city buys it, and part of the proceeds of that sale, got this broken down on my next slide, is that land price. And we're keeping the land price the same. So if the property is on North Mount Juliet Road, we're using for now the $21.29 a square foot for that small parcel. If it's deeper back in the property, like the parking garage, like the other land we're doing, it's that $15 a square foot. And here's that. And I apologize if it's a little small. I probably should have split it into a couple. But walking through here on the top left is where we've got the City Hall construction numbers. So we've got, again, I'm going to be very clear. These are very conservative, very high level estimates. Depending on how you guys build the building out, those numbers can change. if we go in with gold chandeliers and, granite countertops, it's one thing. If we come in with something more consistent with what we expect a good government building to be, it'll be different. Same thing on the fire station. Whoops. We are using a per foot average of what you guys are building on your new fire station than you're under construction with now. That one's actually easier because you're building a fire station. So we can do, again, a per square foot number on, it doesn't sound like the new station that we need to replace what you have needs to be as big as the new one. So it's not as expensive, but a little bit of a sliding scale there. Again, that might change. And then the big one I mentioned is this parking deck, because that will be the way the whole thing comes together. Is the way we are anticipating this is that the city will own the parking garage. Folks coming to the city do not pay for the parking garage. It's a free parking for anybody that's coming in. The multifamily residents, the commercial tenants, well, really the ownership entities are going to pay the city rent for those parking spaces. So the multifamily group will have, my current estimate is, again, very high level, 330 rights to park 336 cars on that. So the multifamily ownership entity, whether we've got 1 unit full or we're 100% full, will pay rent to the city for that. And the same thing for the retail and the office. And that revenue is really where the math on this to us starts to make sense to do something that's really beneficial to all groups. So we end up with the total costs it's about 17 million for City Hall, about 1.7 for the fire station, about 18.5 for the parking deck. So that's 37 total of cost. And the sources of that funds to pay for it is we've got $2 million for the land sale. We've got the per unit multifamily voluntary impact fee that we've been paying on projects that can go to that. I know you guys have $10 million of federal funds that go towards infrastructure. I think that money was one of the things that started this conversation is, hey, we got a pretty good pile of money here. Let's see what we can do with it. And then the last one is a bond. And we're encompassing what we're going to consider the worst case scenario on this bond. So city has not issued, to my knowledge, has not issued a bond in quite a long time. Your credit rating is fantastic. The market in this environment is hungry for tax-exempt bonds, which obviously the city of Mount Juliet can issue. And so what we have assumed for the purposes of this conversation is that you're going to issue a bond for the entire remaining amount. And I say that way is because one thing that we want to try to do is see is there additional public funds, not Mount Juliet public funds. Is there state money? Is there federal money? There's a lot of federal programs throwing a lot of big numbers out for infrastructure, for public works, for parking garages, for transit. So I think there's an opportunity to get more money, non-city money, non-developer money towards some of this. But that's not a guarantee. We don't necessarily know of anything today. So we assumed it was all from a bond. So the way we did the math and where we got really excited that this could work and be a great symbiotic thing is the revenue from that parking garage is more than what we've estimated the principal and interest payment on a 30-year tax-exempt bond. So that from day one, once this is all built and closed, the revenue from the parking garage to the city more than pays both the principal and interest on that tax-exempt bond. So the impact to the city budget is actually very slightly positive. I think the numbers we're looking at now, it's about a $50,000 benefit to the city each year. Again, 30-year fixed rate tax-exempt bond. The tax-exempt is beneficial because the city ends up getting charged less interest on the public markets for that tax-exempt bond because whoever buys the bond doesn't have to pay taxes on the revenue from that. So the city's borrowing cost ends up being significantly less than Apple or Walmart or whoever else is issuing a bond. The other upside to that, and the other place that we're being, in my opinion, quite conservative, is you have both principal and interest bonds like your mortgage, and then you've got interest-only bonds. Most cities, the federal government, issue interest-only bonds. So at the end of the 30 years, the entire principal is due, and they just issue another bond and roll that forward. What I've assumed is actually a principal and interest bond, so that at the end of the 30 years, your payments go away, you're still getting the revenue from the parking garage. So as we look at the what if scenarios, the downside cases, hey, we're off a little bit, don't want to figure out where the rest of that money comes from, we could always go to an interest only bond. That payment comes down 50, 60%. You could still pay the bond off. You could use the money for other things. That's a city budget committee conversation that I don't want to be a part of. But there's opportunities there that this still works, because then you've got your revenue stream and your expense stream on the same timeline, where what we've assumed is that the expense stops and the revenue keeps going. So down the road, that starts to be a pretty significant cash flow model for the city. I've thrown a ton of stuff at you. Go back to the pretty picture of City Hall. Questions, thoughts, comments? I'm sure I skipped over something very quickly, but I promised a couple of you guys that I would go quickly enough that I could leave lots of room for questions, conversations, clarification.
Yes, Mr. Vet.
Yes, am I on? There we go. Well, first of all, thank you for being here tonight, and thank you for the breakdown. Obviously, I thought I'd get and ask the first question because I'm just kind of curious.
Please.
So if we're looking at the 1.291 for the parking garage,
Yes, sir.
and obviously if that's going to pay off the bond, if we're looking down that path, what kind of cost are you looking at for operations maintenance for that parking garage on a yearly basis? And also the second part to that is if because I didn't see the slide in there and maybe I missed it, but how many parking spots are in that?
Yeah, it
garage?
is in the very tall detail.
600?
Right now, we're at, I believe it's 600 parking spaces, if I'm looking at that now. What I've not done is a deep dive on exactly how many parking spaces needed. A lot of that depends on the composition of that retail and office that comes in. Grocery needs a lot less than if the bottom floor of that building is all restaurants. Restaurants are probably your highest concentration of parker. So we've made a lot of assumptions, but right now we're looking at a 600 space parking garage to answer that question. Maintenance cost have not really gotten that far down the rabbit hole, that level of detail. Usually it's something like this. You have a if this was 100% private, you'd have an HOA. Each group would share the maintenance cost for mowing the grass, the common area lights, etc. I think that's one of those future conversations as we move things along to figure out how those costs are distributed. Does the city pay for part of the common area lighting? Do each parcel just pay for what's maintaining their own? I think we can, I don't have a preset answer for that other than we're happy to, figure that out as we move along, because I think that obviously does go in. The other big thing that we have not captured in these is the indirect financial benefits to the city. To that, and operating cost is obviously a negative. You got to maintain a parking garage. But looking at this building, looking at the existing buildings that the city are in, I think that if you just look at the existing utility usage of all of the quote unquote city hall functions, and you look at the utility usage of the new building, one new construction, energy efficient building, we're going to use a lot less energy. Sure. Having people bouncing back and forth through the very buildings, there are benefits there. I've not tried to quantify them today. As we go through and design the building, we've got a group that we've used in the past that can do that math to figure out, hey, this should, depending on how many windows you have, what the spec are there, because we can figure out what your energy usage is today. We can estimate that on the new building. And as the building comes through, figure out, hey, you're saving X dollars a month in the utility bills. The other increase is obviously more property taxes. I know that's not a huge thing for the city. Sales tax, there's a lot of restaurant, retail, grocery on this property. We've not tried to factor any of that in. Permits, impact fees, all of that money that as a developer I can tell you is not insignificant. We've not factored any of that into this model other than the voluntary impact fee that the multifamily does. It's the only one of those permit fees, anything. I know a lot of those ends up getting earmarked for roads, or the county's got the one for the schools, but we've not tried to do that. we think that the overall impact on an operational cost month to month will be a net positive to the city, because we think that the building's operational efficiency on days like today, when it's 1,000 degrees outside, we think the new energy efficient building will probably save more than keeping the lights on in parking garage.
So there's a second part to that, which will be if there's 245 rentals, for the apartments is what we were seeing on H&E, I think it is.
Yep.
And we know, like this has always seemed to be the biggest factor. There's usually 2 people living in an apartment typically.
Yes,
So, now we're up to 490 parking spaces that we need. If we only have 600 parking spots, that leaves the city with roughly 110, not including the businesses. So where's going to be the overflow parking? Because I don't see that on this plot here.
So that's a great question. And part of it is the type, like Station North, the types of units that we're building don't have 2 full cars per resident. And one of the things that our property management team didn't do as good a job on it as we wanted them to. And on future projects in the city, we are going to be much more, we're going to take the more urban approach that we do to maintaining parking garages. We have this number of spaces. Everybody gets 1 space per unit. So you rent a unit, you get 1 space, and then there's a set number of additional parking space passes. We give them a parking pass is basically how we do it. And so my assumption here is 1.4 parking spaces per unit. And we typically have about 30% multi-unit or multi-bedroom units. So that gives you a little bit more than 1 car per bedroom, because most of the people, they're singles. If there's a 2-bedroom, they're either a couple or roommates or whatever. And so we can control that. And then when we run out of parking passes, that becomes on us to do that. And so as we get further in the weeds on the math of that parking garage, that is one thing we will figure out, is to make sure that we have not overcommitted and we have sufficient parking. Because where everybody gets frustrated is, and it's usually the retail that starts to feel that pinch. Hey, I'd love to go to the restaurant, but there's never any parking, so we'll go somewhere else down the street. And so my partner, Mr. Lineberry here, will shoot me if we don't build enough parking for his retail restaurant tenants. And so that's the other way we start to look in as we progress with this, as we start to spend, money with our consultants. There's a lot of data about parking shares. The good news is you look at cities across the country, there's a lot of cities similar to Nashville. There's a lot of suburbs of cities. We're not Brooklyn, but we're not all that different from, McKinney, Texas, or wherever. And so a lot of places have done this, and we can take in there, and we can add a safety factor to it. And we can look from a parking standpoint. Obviously, sure, we're different. And we can look at, okay, if you've got an urban multifamily apartment, how many residents are we actually doing? How many city spaces are you actually going to need with X number of people working in the building? And not just today, but 10, 20, 30 years down the road. And so that's, again, we've got a lot of very high level wild assumptions here on some of this, but I think that's where I'd like to think our cost per parking space is a little conservative too. So if that starts to come down, all of a sudden you can maybe build more parking spaces and your costs stay the same. So that bond payment stays the same. Those are the things that as we look to iterate this process and move forward, we'll get a lot more certainty on exactly how many parking spaces we need. It's 210 to 240 multifamily units. You lose 10 units, that's it's 14 cars. That starts to be a big impact for something. We look at, if there's a lease signed or a LOI signed with a grocery tenant on the bottom of that building versus 3 restaurants, that starts to have a massive impact on what that parking looks like as we move forward. So great question. And I definitely skipped over that.
Well, yeah, I just got a couple more,
Please,
but I just want to be respectful of everybody else's time.
Absolutely.
I guess there's a second question I have, which would be more towards the, the value of currently, like this property right here, you were showing it was valued at a little over 500,000.
Yes, sir.
And that's just the land itself, not including the building assets and everything else included. Is that correct?
That is The appraiser looked at it and said, yes, they looked at a land value, and I took their numbers directly from that, what the appraiser looked at to give us. So I've not filtered that. Whatever number he put, I included here.
And how old is that value? I'm just kind of curious.
He sent it to us Wednesday.
Okay, so it's
last
fairly
week.
new.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
I wish we can get land for this price today. You know what I mean?
Right.
I'd really like to be able to see that possible. That's pretty cheap land for us sitting on it.
He based that mainly on the comps for what we just bought on Caldwell. So
Did
it's
he?
a price per foot. So, I mean, it is
Okay.
a current comp. It's just not a lot of land that this building sits on. You're sitting on 0.6 of an acre, I think.
Is
Yeah.
So, yeah.
it? Seems a lot bigger, I guess, with the other lot behind it.
Well, and that's a separate lot. That one's in there separately. So the two together are more like 750 or 800.
What do you go to sleep?
No, it just won't. There we go.
Oh, you had it.
Yeah, this is 0.59 acres.
0.59? Okay.
It's $20. Sorry.
Okay. All right. So
what we did is we took the two North Mount Juliet Road parcels and I weighted average them to come up with a per square foot number that, as we looked at, when the city buys the land that we'll build the new city hall on, it's based on that with no growth for the, probably 28, 30 months it takes to go through this process, work with the city to design, go through the entitlement. I mean, there's a bunch of phases before we would actually break ground. Then we've got 12, 18 months of actual construction. City's got to move before all of these closings happen. And then as we start looking at the other phases of the project, those would happen then. So the office, the multifamily, realistically, we're not opening the doors. If we sprinted today, we're 4.5 years before those are actually coming online because of the sequencing of what we're proposing.
So we're looking at really 2 buildings, well, 3 buildings, including the parking garage. That's going to be the city's. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
So you got the firehouse, the parking garage, and then the actual city hall.
Yes, sir.
Now, it was discussed in past discussions, just more of a hearsay, that the city hall was going to have other office spaces in there for retail. Is that no longer part of that? That's going to be separate.
Here, we're open to anything. This is what we are looking at here was the city hall to just be a city building.
Good. Okay.
We felt like that was cleaner.
Yep.
But if you guys feel strongly, we would like this to be an iterative. We would like this to be, one of the purposes of the meetings is to, if you guys feel strongly, let's talk about it.
Well, I mean, I'm obviously in favor of keeping the city building separate, just so that
Sure.
way for future growth, as well as keeping that, as a property there. So when it comes
to that point, to that point, the retail and office that surrounds the parking garage, we're looking for that to be basically a condo regime. So the city just owns the parking deck and not the retail office that's
Sure.
connected to it. There'll be firewalls and stuff. So from a code standpoint, they are separate buildings, but you walk through it, it's one structure.
Awesome. And then the last question I just have real quick, if that's okay. The property management side, obviously this is going to be a large complex up here.
Yep.
So how is that going to be divided when it comes to the city compared to what's going to be, maintained under your umbrella?
It's to be determined. Again, we're open to it. Our general assumption is that we like to be a little bit of control freak, because we're not that the city doesn't do a fantastic job of maintaining it, but 40 years down the road, your successors, who knows? So we, especially as it gets the areas around these buildings, the easiest thing for me to underwrite, the easiest thing for me to sell to any bank is everybody takes care of the land they're sitting on. So that the most strict definition is the city would take care of, the area around there. Obviously the parcel that the fire station on, that's one's pretty easy because it is geographically slightly removed, being on the other side of East Hill Street. And then the garage becomes the one has the opportunity for some sharing for sweeping it, lighting it, but those really aren't big numbers. And so I think that given the complexity, I think that can be worked out fairly, I mean, if part of this is, the operations needs to fall on the retail office and multifamily, I'm sure that's not going to be a deal killer right there.
Commissioner Hefner?
What are the gross profit margins did you bake into the city buildings?
We didn't put a straight profit margin on it. What we looked at was, again, going everything on a cost per square foot. Excuse me, I went the wrong way. And so I looked at the cost. We had a little bit of land value, again, based on the same $25 and change per square foot. I've got the shell building cost at $200 a square foot, nice round number. Talked to several commercial contractors who are doing things now. They thought that for a Class A office building is what they would put out. Again, the $125 for interior build out is what they would expect for a Class A office building. So, rooms like this are a lot cheaper than that. So our hope is that that's a conservative number. And then I threw 17% for everything else. That's design costs, that's financing costs, that's legal costs, that's, traffic studies, that's environmental studies. All of that gets punched into that 17%. Our plan is the city hall not to be a profit center for the development team. It's really a cost plus just a little bit that we're looking to do this, but we're not expecting to have a 15-20% profit margin here.
Follow-up question to that. On the building square foot, 44,000 square feet, are you finishing out 44,000 square feet, or are you finishing out a percentage of that?
I believe I think the numbers assume we're finishing out all of it. I think your current city needs are closer to 30. And so I think that, again, I'm trying to be overly conservative, but I think what we're looking at is probably what you need is to build 3 of the 4 floors, 2 of the 3 floors, and leave one open for future build out as the city grows. And so you've got that shell space, and then you can build the core out. I've got the cost in there. If you need all 44,000 square feet, or you say, hey, let's build it all out, we may just have empty offices for a while. That's, again, trying to be conservative. That's the way we've run that number. So that, I'm not going to do that math well in my head.
It's 28,000 feet.
It's 28. Okay. So I did take a floor off. Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
So on the build out itself, I did take it for 3 of the 4 floors. Thank you.
Got it.
I went back and forth. So my apologies.
Last question. How do we get to the 44,000 square feet? Is that something?
That is based on the footprint that we assumed on the building here.
Was that, Kenny, did you provide that number?
When we were thinking about it being 4 stories, I don't know how the needs assessment part came up, because of course, the way that the city's growing, we're moving public works into the facility as well, so we got the mindset of 4 floors.
Gotcha.
And so what we looked at and if we progress with this and if we move to the next stage, that is one of those first things we'll do is Gina Manuel, who's our architect that's done everything. So every time you've seen one of our projects with a pretty picture or an actual building, she and her team have done that. They've done a lot of governmental work before. They did the remodel of the state capitol building. And one of the things they've done is needs assessments that Kenny mentioned for city governments to figure out, okay, talk to each department. What are your staffing needs? How many conference rooms do you need? That's probably one of our first steps, because that more than anything will then inform how many square feet we actually need, what it needs to look at. Do you have cube space? Does everybody have an office? Is there conference rooms? All of those things pretty quickly, then we can get a pretty tight budget based off a lot of that, because walls and glass are more expensive in an office building than the break room countertops. Those are your big budget item things. So we can pretty quickly, after have a needs assessment, be able to really tighten in the size of that building and what that building costs, because that's the big driver. And during the same time, again, assuming we're moving forward, we'll figure out the parking numbers, because we'll start to be able to dial in some of those likely users and be able to really work with the civil engineers who really do a lot of that math to figure out, okay, safely, you can assume this level of share. The office resident and the apartment resident, they're not all there all at the same time every time. But you're also, some of them might be, somebody goes to work on Saturday, somebody, we all know it's not 100% and it's not 0%. So where in the middle it is, and that's part of that next step to figure out. And to me, the goal is to keep it so that the revenue offsets the expense. I mean, that to me is our silver bullet to try to make sure that we can come up with a way to make sure that that's my metric of a massive win-win for the city.
Anything else? Commissioner Mullally?
All right, will you go back to what the city currently owns now
Yes, ma'am.
on that one? Yeah, that. So this whole block,
Yes, ma'am.
say, including the corner over there where the general store is,
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
what is the percentage of the city, what the city owns now in that whole,
The blue pieces and this yellow one.
but a percentage?
I don't know off the top of my head.
Well, I tell you, you've got about 5 acres. No, wait. It's 7 acres total. We've got 5 acres. So you've got about 2 acres, just in rough numbers.
Okay. All right, so after this gets built, the whole block, the percentage of what the city would own
It would be less.
would be less. So we would only own City Hall and the garage
And you would not.
and the fire hall.
Yes, ma'am. This would not change. So yes, ma'am. So the city, the square footage of dirt would go down. Yes, ma'am.
All right, assuming this would require a rezone
Yes, ma'am.
and a land use amendment or not?
I don't know. That's I don't remember. There's a mix of uses. I don't know what the land use policy is off the top of my head. So I
All right, so total, we're talking what, 37 million total?
for the city buildings, that's yes, ma'am, 37,255, and that very important $6.
Okay, and you're figuring in here the 10 million from the federal funds.
Yes, ma'am.
I personally was hoping that would go toward the police department headquarters. And I don't know that we've actually talked about that yet. I know that there are several options. Okay. Well, those were basically my questions.
Sure, absolutely. Well, and one of the first things if we do move forward and try that next step is and you guys all know my partner, Brian Heuser, he's an economic development professor at Vanderbilt. Going out and finding federal grants is a meaningful part of his daily job. And so one of the things that we want to do to help make this better for everybody is see if there are any other federal grants for a new police station, city parking garages, new city halls, other federal money that we can go grab because, a $2 million grant moves the needle a lot, right? And as much money has been coming out with all the COVID pills, and a lot of that went straight out. I think that's where your $10 million came from. But a lot of those are, they're still sitting in buckets for cities to apply for. And so that's, again, one of those things that I've not factored in here, but we think there's a lot of potential upside that moves the needle to everybody's benefit a lot here.
Just a curious question, just the bottom line. Who stands to make the most money off the whole deal?
I don't know. I mean, to me, if everybody doesn't win, then it's not the right thing. But I think that it positions the city really well for its future growth. I don't know how to quantify that. What kind, if city department A doesn't have to get in their car and drive down the street or walk down the street to city department B, that's valuable, but I have no idea how to quantify that. And quantifying that over the next, 7,500 years of the life cycle of the building we'll build, starts to be a challenge. So I struggle to answer your question because there's a lot of financial assumptions in the city value that I don't know that I'm qualified to make. Obviously it's lucrative to us. That's why we're proposing it. But we think it could be a great benefit to the city too, which is why and that's really where this conversation started was, going back and looking at the map. Hey, it's silly to have, one project here and one project there that kind of wink and nod at each other as they pass on the sidewalk. Let's try to do something that blends together, that's denser, that's more integrated, that's more walkable for everybody to create, that's why I kind of skipped over a lot of these concept images. It's that, there's a lot of parkland in the middle of the site plan. There's a city square that's, mostly pedestrian. There's a village green that allows for a lot of that functionality for a true downtown experience in a way that I've heard people in Mount Juliet talk about since I've started working here on the train station redevelopment project 7 years ago. And so I kind of, in my haste, skipped through a lot of that stuff. So back to your value question, if you've got a village green outside of City Hall, what's that worth? I hope that's a benefit to everybody. And being able to take the whole block gives you the scale to realize that goal versus, us doing something on the property and you guys doing your redevelopment and, you having to move people and then move them back while you're in construction and all that. So.
Anything else,
That's all.
Commissioner?
That's all.
Vice Mayor? Got 5 minutes before we got a public hearing. So
You want to ask all these at once or?
Whatever's easier.
First of all, I'm a little
Easy.
concerned. There's no value to the building as it stands today, is what you're saying. It's all land value, no structure value, correct?
That's the way the appraisal did it.
So, right, on the weighted appraisal, it was just the building, correct? I mean, just the land, not the building.
That's right. On the appraisal that we requested, sorry, I'm a little hoarse. The appraisal that the numbers are shown here, that's only land value.
Okay, all right. The bond rate at 3.06%, you got that from where?
I got that. So I had a study that was 3 months old that we had commissioned on muni bond rates. With all the rate movements we've had, I looked it up on, it was one of the data websites on public AAA rated muni bond rates as of Friday.
Okay.
I can find the source, but I looked at a couple to make sure they were consistent.
Okay.
But that rates as of Friday. Just
Next question, I think it's to Kenny. Has Dana verified that this $10 million can be used for this project?
It could be, but that coming up tonight, I want to make sure that my opinion and belief would it be better served to use it toward the police facility because it's the most important need for the city right now. And that was the impression I got from the Board of Commissioners. So that hadn't been brought up with any conversations. It could be used for such a facility, but we had sort of in-house planned that to be used with the other 10 that we'd set aside for the police facility. That, of course, ultimately would be up to the commission if that changed.
Okay. The revenue numbers that were based, that you were basing on the parking garage coming in, and you did say that would pay the bond note.
yes, sir.
Okay. Is that based on 100% usage or is that based on 50%, 75%?
That is based on the way we're anticipating this. It's not the resident of the retail tenant, the retail owner or the office owner or the apartment owner paying that. It's the owner of the building paying for it. So the entity that owns the apartment complex pays that to the city so that it is independent of occupancy. But the apartment building's empty. They're still paying the city the same number. It's fixed.
I understand. I guess my question would be, though, that if you have 600 units, you got 400 that were dedicated to the apartment complex, you got 200 that would be on a revolving scale coming in, leaving, going to restaurants, things of that nature. Would that not be more revenue for the city if did
Well,
using that model?
The number is all three of them. So the revenue to the city is the combination paid by the retail, the office, and the multifamily.
Okay. All right. I kind of, and it's kind of more of a statement than anything else. I kind of am seeing that we're getting a wholesale value for the entire city hall building because $500,000 as an appraisal is, I would look at it being more hotel or I'm sorry, retail as,
Sure.
I mean, wholesale as opposed to when this place is built. Obviously, we're going to be looking at another value that is going to be a new usable, functional value. So I'm just wondering why we couldn't, you look at the building itself
Sure.
also and put that into the appraisal. It has a value to us now.
Sure.
That's what I'm
And
saying.
I think that's fair. We needed a starting place. And so we went and got the appraisal. And that was I think that all of these numbers are going to move, candidly. The costs are going to move. We all know interest rates are going to move. Our hope is that by the time we're actually issuing bonds, I'm knocking on wood here for the sake of everybody, we're on the downside and rates are starting to go back to where they've been. We don't know. And so I think it's more of our intent here was not necessarily to say, I want you to vote on this value for City Hall. It's more of hey, this is how we think we can come in. We know all of these numbers are going to change, but here's our starting place. So let's start the conversation of, hey, we may need to adjust City Hall's value. Hey, we may need to adjust the annual rent per parking space on the revenue side. Hey, all of those, hey, we think we may not actually need as big of a City Hall, or we maybe overshot how much it's going to cost, or all of those things are going to change. So I'm not expecting you guys to lock in the value of City Hall based on that appraisal. That was the appraisal we got last week. We kind of looked at it as hey, here's somebody who knows more about land value on this block
Right.
than I do. It's a good place to start.
Okay, and I will ask, I've only got really two more, so
Yes.
if you can just bear with me real quick. The square footage of dirt is one thing. The square footage of usable building space is another. Do we know how much usable building space we have with the yellow building down here, City Hall, Public Works?
I do not.
Okay. So my next question would be that,
We think it's about 25.
what is this building, Kenny? Square footage?
15,000.
15,000. That building down to the corner is what?
Oh, it's 2,500 to 3,000 square feet.
Okay, so we're looking about 18 now. Fire hall is what?
2,500 square feet.
Okay, so what are we at? Close to 20? And then Public Works is what?
It's probably 4,000 square feet.
So
It's
we're at
been added
25, then approximately 27. Actually, we got another building that we
Sure.
talk about, but so looking at 27. So what are we looking at the square footage of usable floor space?
It's
After-
Yes, sir. We're looking at in the City Hall building. I think we're looking at 44,000, and then the fire station of keeping it the same size as your fire hall now,
Which is what? Do we know?
2,500. Fire station down the street, ballpark size. Yes, sir.
Yeah, the living space is now, if you're not counting the bays, are you?
No.
Just usable floor space.
Yeah, it's roughly that, yeah.
And again, we know all of that's going to change, but that for my math here, we assume your fire station stay about the same, and your City Hall space, we're going to build out 28, but having another floor that's just,
So I guess to finish off my when we were talking earlier about value, we're talking about going from 27,000 square foot of usable space to approximately 50,000 square feet of usable space. So you're looking at 25,000 appreciated, and at the cost to build at 200 to 225 a square foot. So that's where our value is going to be, correct?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Plus the build out. So, I mean, if we are looking at our total build cost for the City Hall building with the shell and the interior is $325.
Is what?
$325 a foot. So the shell of the building at 200, and we'll take all 44,000 of that. And then we've got 28,000 again, just on City Hall that we'll actually build out.
So $325 per square foot times 25,000 is going to be 28,000 is going to be our approximate value
Yes.
then,
And then
our,
you've
or our
got-
approximate profitable value, if you want to look at it that
And
way.
then you've got built-in expansion space of an additional, what is that, 16,000 feet?
Plus the revenue that comes from the parking garage.
Yes, sir.
And I will tell you, please don't use the word revenue neutral. This is government. Nothing is revenue neutral. We lose everywhere we go. So-
I will. That one other thing I wanted to, that Mark mentioned that I think I wasn't clear about. It is not our intention that when you pull into the parking garage, anybody has to pay. So it is our intention that the ownership groups pay, not somebody going to, a meeting like this, not somebody going to shop at the grocery store, not somebody going to, park at the multifamily group. I mean, they'll probably pay it in rent, but it's not there's a alley arm, you pull a ticket, you pay when you leave. We'll have the infrastructure there. Again, if you guys decide 10 years from now you want to do that, but that's not the goal.
So when it's all said and done, our appreciative value at that point is going to be approximately $9.1 million that we will have gained. I think it might help answer your question that we were talking about. So we get something out of it.
Well, and my partner who, again, economic development professor, and starts looking at that secondary, tertiary benefits of investment. You know, people use government seed investments because of the spillover benefits. If we look at going back to our map, if we build all of this, all of a sudden, all of these properties around us are now a lot more valuable. So somebody then comes in and has the opportunity. I'm sure there's, you know, processes and zoning on all of those things, but you start to foster additional development beyond it. And, you know, that's why, you know, the baseball stadium that Nashville did in Sulphur Dells, you know, the amount of revenue in Germantown that we all know happened because the city went in and dumped a bunch of money right there. And then that whole area developed around it. You know, I think we're not quantifying that here, but there is real value there. You know, we can discuss, and economists and professors discuss all day long. Is it a 3x? Is it a 2.5x? Is it a 4x? But it's big. And so when we start to look at what is the value to that, it's beyond the $9 million straight math. And then you start looking at, you know, present value of future tax revenue, present value of operational cost savings. You start taking all of those back, and that's where the finance nerd in me can talk for a very long time. And there is value there that, for the purposes of simplicity in this conversation, I want to mention, but not try to quantify.
I'm good.
All right. Well, we need to adjourn and hold a public hearing. I'll just say there's some ongoing discussions, I think, about public works and where those operations, sewer, and other things. We've got to decide on this.
Sure.
Or it's a component of all this. So a lot of moving parts and a lot more discussions, I think, before anybody can give any clear direction either way. So,
Of course. We wanted to start the conversation.
well, I appreciate your time and coming out here and speaking with us tonight.
Well,
and
thanks
answering the
for everybody
questions.
for your time and your consideration. And y'all all know how to reach me. If you have more questions, if you have more detailed questions, I'm always available and happy to discuss and iterate and look at, you know, we're not saying it's this or nothing. So, you know, we want this to be a process. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. With that, we will adjourn this workshop. I'm going to give the guys in the back a heads up.